Hi, Allison. I can't hear you, and I haven't been able to hear you. My may I apologize
Oh,
if I screwed
is
up.
that true to everybody?
I don't want to say that, but it may be. I was trying to send you a message. You look great doing it.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, everybody. I must have been muted. And so I just want to welcome everybody to the talk. I'm Allison Turner from Source Booksellers here in Midtown Detroit. And I will now have a more perfect introduction to the two conversants today for the book Detroit Remains, which is released today. And it is a perfect book for our bookstore because we are a nonfiction niche. And this book is also about Detroit, and it also has nonfiction content. There's a second reason why this book is very important to me and to this bookstore. It's because it talks about a building, for example, the Bluebird, which I'm a part of because I'm a part of the Detroit Sound Conservancy, and today we have the founder and the director emeritus of Detroit Sound Conservancy. Detroit Sound Conservancy, Carlton Galtz, here with us today. So I'm going to do a few introductions, the introductions that you didn't hear because I was on mute. And so first, I am sure that Krista is going to correct me because I feel like I don't say her last name properly. So we'll get that straight when they start to have the conversation. But Dr. Krista Rizalski is a historical archaeologist who has been conducting research in North American cities, and in the Caribbean for the past 2 decades. She is the department chair of the associate professor of anthropology at Wayne State University. Dr. Rosinski practices archaeology in collaboration with local residents, community organizations, and government agencies. She uses archaeological findings to address the legacies of social justice, contribute to historic preservation efforts, and foster sustainable heritage management. She is the author of 30 publications, including 3 books. Her first book, Contemporary Archaeology and the City, Creativity, Ruination and Political Action, that was in 2017, and with Laura McAtney, and Archaeological History of Montserrat, West Indies in 2000, and that was with Don Cherry. And we are here today celebrating Detroit Remains, Archaeology and Community Histories of 6 legendary sites. And the sites are here in Detroit. She will be in conversation with Carlton Galtz, who is an experienced leader in public history, especially in the realms of art, nonprofit management, and development, contemporary media making, and cultural heritage and strategy. And today, he is very important to this event because he had so much to do with some of the content in the book. When I was reading it, I saw that there were some quotes from him in the book, and it's because mostly the Detroit Conservancy and the site, the Bluebird, and the Grandy Ballroom are part of this book, and that those 2 assets are a big part of Detroit Sound Conservancy. And Carlton is the founder of Detroit Sound Conservancy and the director emeritus. So this is going to be a fantastic conversation, and I want to introduce them both and have them both to come on.
That sounded great. Thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say that we are really delighted to have you here on the release date of your book. What a fantastic work that it is, and Detroit is very excited, to have, this type of, this type of focus, not just on the 6 sites, but on the city. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison. It's an absolute privilege to be here, spending the first day of the book's release with one of my favorite partners in collaboration and supporting my favorite nonprofit organization in the city, the Detroit Sound Conservancy. So yes, I am biased, but I'm very excited to share the story of the archaeology that we did at the Bluebird Inn with everybody today, and to speak about the book more in general. But I realize that most people here haven't even maybe heard of it yet or read it yet. So we will speak about it in the abstract and get to the behind the scenes motivations for it too. So thank you, Allison and Carlton.
Well, absolutely. And, Krista and I spoke a little bit yesterday, just sort of talking about the things we might speak about today. You and I have been talking about these things for, 7 or 8 years now. I was looking back at our first emails, which go back to 2014, and even those emails refer to other conversations that I cannot find. So I think the conversations are ongoing, and so tonight we're not going to try to do it all. We're going to try to pique people's interest, and I think the biggest takeaway that I'd like people to take away tonight really is this idea of the importance of archaeology and urban archaeology, and that is something that 7-8 years ago I wasn't thinking about, and I don't think necessarily anybody who wasn't involved in archaeology. That our default with archaeology is something you work around all the time when you have students who think that they're going to be archaeologists, and they think they might do A. How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So why'd you write the book, Krista?
All right. A very direct segue into whatever it was that you were just saying. Well, I think you could probably ascertain my kind of viewpoint and mission in writing this book from the title alone, Detroit Remains. I got to know the city when I moved here in 2011. Of course, I knew quite a lot about Detroit before that, but living here and experiencing what it was like to live amongst the remains of a once incredibly prosperous city as it was descending into bankruptcy, I felt like my introduction to the city was one that was circulated by the international media and all the stereotypes that were going around at the time about Detroit lying in ruins. And as an archaeologist, archaeologists are used to looking at fragments and ruins stereotypically. This fascinated me. And archaeologists are very concerned with the material remains of the past, portable things, and the built environment. But we also look at spaces, including cities, in a longer term perspective. So where the national, international media was treating Detroit as if the sky was falling and the city was about to swirl away into oblivion, from an archaeological perspective, I knew that this wasn't the case, and that there were really vibrant stories to be told about the city and how the city's remains existed and survived in both material traces and in communities, and that they deserve to be told. So I thought that I took my time in developing a number of community-based projects over the years and cultivated relationships. And this book is just a sample of 6 of those. But the reason why I wrote the book is because I wanted to tell the story of the Detroit that remains, and how that story can be told, at least in the beginning, from an archaeological perspective. So I I use archaeology as sort of an entry point into engaging these underappreciated histories. I won't say they're forgotten. These are legendary histories. Everybody has a story about the places in Detroit remains, but archaeology gives us a different perspective on that. And the other reason, there's two reasons why I wrote this book, because I wanted to counter the myth that Detroit lies in ruins and there's no stories to be told. The other reason is because there's never been a book about archaeology written about Detroit before, focused on Detroit. And so I had the immense privilege and responsibility of crafting a book about Detroit that I thought should be accessible to people within, but also outside of the field. So I wanted to position the archaeology of Detroit to look like something different than archaeology looks like in other places. I wanted it to be engaged with the issues that Detroiters care about right now. I wanted it to open up avenues for conversations about historic preservation and social justice. And really, I just wanted to tell some good stories that would get people interested in the relevance of archaeology.
You've already hit on my next question, was sort of what makes your book a little different, than maybe some of the other books that are happening in archaeology. There may be some archaeologists listening in tonight, friends and others, but, just bring us into that conversation a little bit, the kind of information, the stuff you're probably, you're going to be talking about in your introduction, and everyone's going to read that when they get the book, but just take us into that conversation. What is the dominant conversation in archaeology these days, and how is your book a little different?
Yeah, I mean, without going into my Archaeology 101 syllabus here and beginning a semester-long lecture, let me just back up for a second and just kind of clarify for the audience, because people may or may not know what archaeology is in the first instance. Archaeology is the study of the human past, not dinosaurs, through material remains. And you get
that a lot? Do people say that a lot?
Yeah, a lot of beyond Detroit, it's dinosaurs. In Detroit, they think we're looking for Jimmy Hoffa. So, different types of dinosaur species, I guess, but no offense to Jimmy Hoffa's family. So the material remains of the human past. Now, the notion of the past, archaeologists can study any time period in any place in the world, and Hollywood portrays us as doing certain things. But in fact, archaeologists concern themselves with the very recent past all the way up to the present. And my specialty within archaeology is called historical archaeology. So I focus on the period of about the past 500 years or so that coincides with the European expansion around the world, mass industrialization and urbanization, and all of the social and environmental changes that came with that. So historical archaeologists, we use the very same methods and techniques that my colleagues who work on ancient Greece or Egypt use. We do large-scale surveys, we excavate or dig at sites, we recover hundreds of thousands of fragments of artifacts and cart them back to the lab and make sense out of them there. So archaeology can be as scientific as one wants to take it in those directions, but it can also be, especially historical archaeology, as creative as one wants to be in presenting the information, because historical archaeologists also have access to a trove of written records, everything from official documents like tax accounts and laws to personal correspondence, newspaper archives, historic maps. And where we differ from historians in our approach to those historical archival resources is that we consider them to be objects of material culture. And this is relevant to the Bluebird story. We'll talk about that later. We consider who wrote them, who was included in the references, who was excluded, who's not represented. And then historical archaeologists also have another source of data that they pull on and integrate into their work, and that is oral history or folklore. Sometimes we have direct memories from people who were associated with the site. The Bluebird is an example of this. And sometimes they're intergenerational memories that are passed down through descendant communities related to a site. So we are very much engaged with people who we would call stakeholder communities when we do archaeology at more recent sites. So the flavor of archaeology that is presented in Detroit Remains is more along the lines of what we would call community-based archaeology. So I did not arrive to Detroit with a research program that I unfolded and walked over to Carlton and said, I am going to do research on the Bluebird. No, this was a much more grassroots process where we got to know each other. We got to know our shared priorities. This was a situation for each case in the book. And together we crafted the objectives and missions of the archaeological recovery and what was going to happen during and afterwards. So that's a very long answer to why this is archaeological and what flavor of archaeology it is. But there you go. You've reached the midterm.
No, it's good. No, this is helpful. I mean, I think what you're talking about. I was speaking to someone today who had a child in school, and they were saying that social studies, at least for their school district, is no longer social studies. It's the humanities. That humanities are sort of maybe coming back in a way, potentially, in terms of not just in terms of some funding out of the American Rescue Plan, right? There are funds coming out, but also just in the sense of as something that is of value, right? And in archaeology, the way at least you described it here, you know, it makes sense as humanities. This is about humans and our experience, our lived experience.
Yeah, and that's something too. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one other point I wanted to very quickly make, is that the way I wrote Detroit Remains is unconventional in the scope of archaeological scholarship. I think you asked, what are archaeologists doing now? Archaeologists are still writing a lot of technical articles filled with jargon and theoretical discourse, and I do that too. But they aren't always writing in the first instance outwards. So I designed this book so that in the first instance, Detroit archaeology would be in conversation with people who care about Detroit, whether they're academics, residents, someone living over in England who has done a lot of work on Detroit, whatever the case may be. So when I talk about 6 different sites in the city, the place-based histories, and I tell their story. I tell it in a narrative fashion. I'm not presenting the data, establishing a research question, and then going through methodically. These are kind of meandering stories that are totally led by where the archaeological evidence takes us. And then I layer that archaeological evidence with other sources of personal histories and archival records, and to arrive at a kind of full picture of the site as a human site with lots of different actors involved. You know, this is not the story of my research. This is the story of a kind of collective Detroit bootstrapping preservation push.
No, and well said. And you know, not everybody's in sort of the university and the academy, and we also have our stereotypes. You know, I have a PhD, and we all have you know, on television they show what professors are supposed to be doing, or what the English department looks like, or something like that. But I think it's important to really say that, you know, just as every aspect of society is going through significant transformation right now, significant transformation, and in Detroit since 2008, especially because of the foreclosure crisis, and that's impacting the academy too, you know, and it's bringing people out, it's bringing people in, you know, and you've chosen a path that I can attest to is more unconventional, and I think you're going to get a readership that you wouldn't otherwise get because of that. I think that's probably one of your editors knows that. Let's get to some sites here. So we got a good question here. Let's get to it. Can you just bang bang bang? Can you just, you know, give the highlights of what people are going to read about when they pick up this book?
Yeah, let me tell you about the 6 sites in a nutshell. And I organized them in the book chronologically in the order in which I conducted the study. So you can see community archaeology evolve over the course of the book and my approaches to it. The first site that is featured is the Speakeasy that is underneath Tommy's Bar and Grill down on 3rd Street, 3rd and 4th, right behind the First Presbyterian Church. And we got involved there through a contact at who was then at Preservation Detroit back in 2012. And honestly, if I had $1 for every random person that contacts me about the remains of a speakeasy that they know of somewhere in Detroit or in Metro Detroit, I'd be a millionaire. So I was kind of vetting these ruthlessly, but it really piqued my interest that one of the Preservation Detroit staff members at the time had done a bit of Alexandra's question, is Jimmy Hoffa buried there? They thought so. So this is where we got into that legendary stuff. So there's a pile of dirt and all that, and bodies. So we investigated the speakeasy, verified that there was a speakeasy there called Little Harry's. We'll get back to that, Detroit history buffs later. And then there was just this cascade afterwards of all sorts of different events and benefits to the business owner and the preservation community. So that's, I had some really interesting interactions with descendants of the Purple Gang and some of the mafia related people who ran Little Harry's Speakeasy. And when we work with descendant communities in archaeology, all of the literature is about, working with being very sensitive to stakeholders, histories, and so on and so forth. And so when we have descendants of criminals, that's a different batch of people. So that case study was really interesting because we see Detroit kind of essentialized in the news today as this hotbed of crime and dereliction. But take the time machine back 100 years, and it's romantic to think about crime and murder at an arm's length. So that was interesting.
Let's put a pin in that one for the Bluebird.
Yeah.
So we've got Tommy's. Let's.
Okay, now we're going to go faster. Then we have the Ransom Gillis House in Brush Park that was under renovation in 2015, and along with Preservation Detroit and the Pewabic Pottery, we did an excavation in the backyard there at the location of the original Pewabic Pottery at the very same time that the TV show Rehab Addict and Nicole Curtis were renovating the Ransom Gillis House. And so that chapter tells the story of a long century of urban renewal and preservation efforts, many of which went awry. And it tells the story of developer-funded archaeology, which is a big deal in Detroit. And the third chapter is the Bluebird Inn. And the Bluebird Inn is a very significant, important jazz club, mid-century especially, which is significant for being one of the locations that introduced bebop jazz to the city. And that's what we knew about it when we started this project, that it was legendary for that association. Had a lot of unanswered questions about when that happened and how. Archaeology helped reveal that. The next chapter is focused on Gordon Park on the west side, on the corner of Rosa Parks and Claremont Street. And people here will recognize that as the location of the flashpoint for the 1967 uprising or rebellion. And I'd been going out there for years with my urban archaeology class doing surveys and documentation. And we told the story about how that park was neglected for almost 50 years, but then converted into a space of commemoration and the politics behind that. And the fifth site is the Grandee Ballroom, also on the west side, not too far from the Bluebird. And we use the story of the Grandee's decay over time and preservation efforts to really highlight the power of grassroots preservation in Detroit, but also sites of music heritage and the debates around preserving them. And then the last case study is focused on the demolition of a 19th century log cabin that was located just north of the north end of Detroit on the border with Hamtramck in 2018. And its demolition at the hands of the Detroit Land Bank caused a major controversy and harsh words between Hamtramck and Detroit. So that was an example of a not so successful collaboration that ended up in other types of collaboration. So that's kind of the full picture, and you can see the kind of different themes there running throughout in terms of urban renewal and preservation and underground activities and counterculture and innovation. So I'm happy to answer questions about any of those, but I think we really want to dig into the Bluebird a little bit.
I do,
Yes.
and I also want to be conscious of time. And if people have questions, I'm just getting back into teaching, where teachers will say things like, let's have a conversation in the chat there, and then students are supposed to, you know, to populate the chat with questions. But if you have questions, please throw them in.
Mhm.
Yes, let's talk about the Bluebird. But then I want to make sure we don't leave tonight without talking a little bit about Good Trouble, which is, you know, a John Lewis quote, but I think it's sort of become has more of a commonplace now. And I think there's something, as you were saying earlier, I think there is something different, different about the book and what you do. In the same way that Sound Conservancy is a little different as well. We are also a community-based archive, and that's a language that's sort of going out there now. It's now become sort of popular. The Mellon Foundation is using that kind of language. But when we started, and even now, the conventionality of special collections is not to be community-based, right? It's about many times being a fortress in some ways, and vetting, right, the border, right, constantly, right? And I think you're in a different set of process. So let's just talk about the Bluebird. Let's just talk about some of those. Talk about what you want, but to me, the documents that we pulled out, that's a great story, and I don't know if that's something that is the most important to you, but what's the thing that pops up at you at Bluebird now that you've looked back at it, you've been thinking about it, and now that you know that there's some new things happening there? So
yeah, I mean, I think when folks think about the Bluebird, they think about the world famous musicians who played there: Coltrane, Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, so many others in the early 50s, especially late 40s. And I love that music heritage of the Bluebird, but as much as I would love to tell those stories, I had to go in the direction that the archaeological finds took us. And when the archaeology team went in there for the first time, it was in 2015. And at that point in time, the Detroit Sound Conservancy didn't own the building yet. Carlton went to great lengths to secure access to the building. It was not in a good state of preservation. And we designed that survey over the course of many months, knowing or thinking that maybe this would be the last time anybody ever went inside the Bluebird. And that whole area was subject to vandalism and arson and so on. So we hit it with the full suite of archaeological methods. And I think what stands out to me most is the material remains, the portable objects and the document cache that the archaeologists recovered, and how those were mobilized to add value to the Bluebird story. So for people that don't know, stuffed above the main entryway in the vestibule of the Bluebird, a couple members of the archaeology team saw a pile of papers teetering out from the ceiling over into the floor. Some had already fallen on the floor. There was a cache there, a stash of over just about 2,000 documents detailing the inner workings of the Bluebird. Now, this was entirely, for the entire run of its history as a music venue, this was a Black-owned business. And it was only operated by two different families, the Dubois, I say it wrong every time, Dubois and Eddins families. And so all of these documents were bundled by the day of the week and ordered chronologically. They were even paper clipped on top, and which is any archivist dream, any archaeologist dream. And they contained receipts, payroll ledgers, handwritten notes, cashed checks, redundant records. As it turns out, two of the women in the Dubois family were doing the record keeping, Gertrude and Legine, sisters. And they kept fastidious records. The records take us from 1948 to 1949. So my story of the Bluebird, from an archaeological vantage point, focuses on that period. And one of the most exciting finds in that document cache is the payroll ledger, and I have a picture of it in the book. It lists all the people who were employed at the Bluebird in 1948, 1949, and right at the bottom, second from the bottom, is Phil Hill, and right next to it in faint pencil it says band, and 2 entries above that was Jimmy Caldwell, and right next to it says band. You go through the records, and you can see that on September 11th, 1948, that was the day when the manager, Buddy Du Bois, got rid of Jimmy Caldwell and hired Phil Hill to play his combo to play the first bebop show there. So that was kind of some material evidence about that kind of corroborated the legendary switch to bebop jazz and catapulted the Bluebird to really worldwide musical fame. So I think that for me was the most revealing facet of it. But the other thing that the document cache revealed was the very deep networks that the Du Bois family had to Paradise Valley. So in some ways, this is the most complete archaeological assemblage of business records from Paradise Valley, because Paradise Valley is gone. It's been gone for 50 years now, and there are no archaeological remains of Paradise Valley to be studied. They're all under the Chrysler and other freeways.
One thing that I think is important to say here is, this is definitely a time to nod to some people, some living, some gone, and I always have to be careful not to be too maudlin. That's already my tendencies to go that way. So I'm not going to try to cry my eyes out tonight, but let's talk about some living, people that, to nod to. One of them is Lauren Brace, who was one of many of that team, but who under your encouragement went off and completed his master's thesis, really working on that work. And, if you could just take a minute and just talk about the importance of replicating yourself as a scholar. I think it's sort of a little bit insider baseball, but I don't think one of the things that people I hope will appreciate about the kind of work that you do is that, we're trying to replicate ourselves. We think what we're doing is good work. We're trying to, people are coming to us, they're learning from us. And if no one goes off and becomes an archaeologist ever again, what's the point? And musicians do it. There's an apprenticing kind of experience that goes on there. And I just wonder if you could just speak briefly to the value of students, that this is not only a project that you were a part of, but this was a pedagogical experience that you were a part of.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I don't know how comfortable I feel saying I'm replicating myself. I think I'm replicating a certain type of practice and vision of archaeology. I'm comfortable saying that. I'm fortunate to have just an absolute dynamite group of students here at Wayne State who are really keen to get hands-on experience and roll up their sleeves and go on adventures with me and talk to people. And so at the time of the Bluebird survey and stage removal, I had a master's student, Lauren Brace, who is now doing his PhD at the University of Maryland. And he wanted to take a first pass at analyzing some of the document cache for his master's essay. And he did a phenomenal job. And you really need someone who has the time and attention to detail to wade through 2,000 documents that are receipts and make a great spreadsheet of them. And through his valuable work, we can answer questions like, what were they eating for dinner at the Bluebird? Mm-hmm. What were some of the issues they faced in running the business? The TV kept going out of focus, and the jukebox was breaking, and they were introducing chop suey and chow mein to the menu, and they were running a cash checking business out of there. That was probably their most lucrative operation. So it kind of gives us his work was phenomenal because it gave us the kind of raw data to really think about the Bluebird and the ways it fit into the contours of capitalism in the city at the height of its population. So, and the entire book, every single case study involved a group of Wayne State and other community partners on our cruise. You will never find a respectable archaeologist who works alone. If you encounter an archaeology project that makes it sound like there's just one Indiana Jones in the mix, then that person's pulling your leg, and you might want to give them a side eye. But no, this is true teamwork, team efforts, and there is now a cohort of professional archaeologists who have graduated since completing these projects, who are making differences in cultural resource management, museum studies, as kind of public history scholars, policymakers. So you can go many. I always tell my archaeology and anthropology students, it's not what you can do with an anthropology or archaeological training. It's what you can't do, and there's not much you can't do. It's a very eclectic approach and degree.
Yeah, and I don't know. I want to make sure we're conscious of time here. Source Allison will ping us when we've got 5 minutes to go here. But this leads to something I want to talk about. Maybe going towards the conclusion and any questions that people might have. But I was looking back at our first emails together, and some of them revolved around a site that's not in the book, which is United Sound Systems, which is still threatened as of today, last time I checked, by a major highway and federal highway project, which of course may or may not have just been funded by the President of the United States with his signature. And so I'm taking a moment to say, this is my good trouble question here a little bit. I remember when you emailed me, and I remember at the time that we were both, and I don't want to say naive. I don't think that's not the word I wouldn't put that word on you. I would put it on me. But there was definitely a conversation about, these people and this this state organization will be doing this because they'll be following the law. Right. And there's a state archaeologist, and there's a state, we have paid, right? You and I and our taxes, we pay people to enact these things, right? Because there is a Preservation Act, and there are some of these things, right? And even in the city of Detroit, the great Janice Chapman, who is the head of the Historic Designation Advisory Board, through city council, right? Who's arguably the most important historian in the state of Michigan, I would say, without having too much of a debate about it. And a Black historian, if that in the city of Detroit, not every city has in the middle of this transformative mode that we're all in this country, not every city has a Black woman as the head of their, historic preservation. So, shout out to Janice. But I guess I'm rallying up to the question of, sort of a what have we learned kind of question, you take it as you would. This is I won't necessarily get on my bully pulpit. This is your time to talk. But do you get a chance in the book to sort of point us to where we ought to be going? Like what could you do? Where do you point us in terms of what's not happening that could be happening? What's holding us back from a more progressive state of affairs when it comes to our own human history in the city that we love?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. We've learned a lot. Carlton, you and I have learned a lot about, working just at the Bluebird alone, but all of these case studies as a whole. I will try to stick to my main, be in my bonnet at this moment.
Please.
I have learned, one of the things I've learned in completing this book, and I think I share this viewpoint with you, is that there are huge problems with the way in which the historic preservation system is structured in the United States in terms of how it functions and who it includes and what types of places and histories are included and who can access and navigate the system. And I think that applies to every single case study in this book. Detroiters are, and was just blown away when I really got to dig in and become acquainted with the various communities with whom I worked in this book in Detroit. Detroiters are unconditionally in love with their history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They are advocates, they are stewards, they are caretakers. Their intentions are, the ones that aren't developers, their intentions are totally, in many cases, genuine, and they don't just see economic value in restoration and preservation. They see symbolic value, cultural value. There's other elements too, but I think Carlton, we learned this with the Bluebird. There have been so many fits and starts with efforts to preserve the Bluebird over those decades, and they become hamstrung because of issues with momentum and red tape and having the know-how to navigate the bureaucracy of preservation systems statewide and nationwide. And so it really requires people who are trained in preservation, who are in positions already of privilege and power to operationalize that. And those people are not people who represent the demographic makeup of Detroit on the whole. So we do not have a diverse and inclusive system of historic preservation in Detroit. So I'm hoping, through training my students, that's something that can really catalyze change in the future. It's a slow process. And so we are in it for the long game. And when you talk about good trouble, this is one of the ways I'm trying to make good trouble, agitating that through the points that I make about preservation in this book, by calling attention to the fact that protections for historic preservation and until recently, National Register sites didn't really include Great Migration era history. Great Migration era from 1915 onwards sites are not really considered by cultural resource management archaeologists working in the city. That's a huge problem. And that is why I was shocked and astounded when I went to the state archaeologist office to look at their inventory of sites for Detroit. And I discovered that the Bluebird Inn is the very first archaeological site. We got an official site number for it on the state inventory of archaeological sites that is associated with Black owners. And they weren't residents there, but Black occupants. So this is the first site of African-American archaeology in Detroit to be investigated by research archaeologists and collaborators. So that's why I thought I had such a responsibility to tell that story in the way we did. We don't have a city archaeologist in Detroit. We have a city historian now, and that's something I am trying to campaign for by bringing a book like this to fruition. And whoever's listening out there, we have a lot of really good students that could do this job. So
this goes right to the end. And I just want to say,
Yeah.
I just saw something in the chat here
Awesome. Yeah.
from Janet. It says, your work is dearly appreciated. Detroit's toughness shines through in a special way that's not always known in the field of endeavor. And
Thank you.
Janet, my love to Janet there, and she's amazing, and was what Source has been doing and as a resource, and Allison is vice president. When we brought her in to be our vice president, she didn't blink. She was, well, I think she didn't blink, but she was right. She was right in. And let's finish with this. Let's do our good liberal thing and stay positive. And let's talk about Michigan 250 and America 250. Let's look ahead a little bit. Not everybody is aware or thinking about it right now, but the semi-sequicentennial of the United States is coming, the 250th birthday. You may remember 1776. Well, 2026 is that 250. And the last president, not the current one, but the last one was the one who kicked off the national committees, for that. And Mike Pence, former vice president of the United States, was the head of America 250 when it started. And a number of the state groups across the country were founded at that point. So there's already momentum and rhythm about these plans. And if some of you may remember 1976, happening right on the edge of the Vietnam War. Gerald Ford from Michigan was president of the United States at the time. And there was a feeling that, you know, there was too much animosity at the time. I'm paraphrasing here, but too much animosity at the time. We couldn't have a centralized celebration, rah, rah, rah. So we had a decentralized, you know, celebration of the country. And that's I think it's gonna happen again. There's gonna be funds available at the state and the city level, the municipal level, for celebrations of the country. And so, you know, and there's also going to be monies. I'm here out in the city of Philadelphia, and the African American Museum here was paid for in part by the push for the bicentennial. And of course, it makes sense. This is Philadelphia. But Detroit has something to say, obviously, about the 250. So, you know, I love, you've already given me one wish list, a Detroit archaeologist. I mean, that's got some, I can, let's, you know, we could write that. You know, somebody could help ask us to write that grant. We might be able to do that. That is compelling. What else would be, to you, in your mind, would be sort of the right direction in thinking about how we might have some impact, planning now for 3, 4, 5 years in the future? If you ask now, you're liable to get something, and you can ask for something bigger, right? You have more time for your dreams. So what would be, give me something, just city archaeologists, anything else that would just be.
Well, I mean, city archaeologists, there are city archaeologists for many different cities in the United States. We're just behind that curve. So that, you know, that's not a new thing. But I think we really need to work on making our collections, archaeological, archival, more accessible and transparent, and create some really great educational and public programming around them so that we can orient folks to them, teach them how to use them, and spur some creative and collaborative endeavors with them. So I'd really, here's my dream. And it taps into the work that the DSC is doing, because I've been, you know, an advisor and #1 fan of the DSC for a very long time now. I would like to see the Bluebird open, functioning by then, and then using that as a community space where we could, you know, the Bluebird itself is in many different locations now. The stage is one place, the Bluebird building is another place, the artifacts are here at the museum with us, the musicians are other places. So I'd like to see the Bluebird reunited, and for us to focus some programming and community outreach. And, you know, it doesn't just have to be about the archaeology. I think that turning point, that anniversary, could be a moment where archaeology already has a seat at the table and is shown to be relevant to these conversations. I want the archaeologists to be seen as indispensable in the same way that the archivist and the lawyer and the musician are indispensable, and the architect to the Bluebird. So that is my goal. We've got 5 years to work towards it. And I think 5 years, 3 years, what year is it? 4 years? Yeah, something like that. We've got a couple of years to work towards it.
There's a good question here, I think relates to this, and you were already there. I mean, I think, you know, curricula is the thing. We've got Corey here says, you know, what are your thoughts on integrating archaeological concepts, techniques in high school curriculums from the elementary school through the high school? I mean, I remember, at least in Michigan, for the second centennial, in 1987, the 150th anniversary of the state. I mean, the reason why even I know that word, right, is because there was curricula on the elementary school level that foregrounded the state's history, right? That there's a real push there, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you, Corey. Corey's one of my former students, and she is working in the museum world right now. She's doing very well. My thoughts are that it would be invaluable if we were able to make those connections to bring more of an integrated social science and humanities heritage, whatever you want to call it, curriculum into the local school system. We've been doing this for years on a very small scale with the educational outreach program we have called Time Jumpers, which goes into middle schools, teaches kids about archaeology. But you know, the pandemic kind of put the kibosh on that. I'm involved with an effort with the Hamtramck school system. I'm on the educational committee out there at the museum where we're trying to do this exact thing. But We have so many diverse communities to serve in Detroit and Metro Detroit that we have to develop these curriculum. And all four, archaeology is like the gateway drug of the sciences. Kids will say, oh, I don't want to do chemistry. I don't want to do physics. I don't want to do biology. But then you start talking to them about radiocarbon dating or sequences or pottery materials, and they don't realize they're doing science without, but we're teaching them that. So anyway, I would really like to see a curriculum that introduces and foregrounds archaeological methods and impacts, but focuses on the Great Migration era and that era of industrialization, because we have so many different communities and ethnic groups coming into the city at that time. We have an opportunity to tell the story of Detroit and its underrepresented communities in a way that doesn't necessarily privilege one community history over another, and it shows the ways in which people worked together, but also came into conflict and resolved those conflicts with each other, to tell the honest history of the city.
One of the powerful things about the Bluebird is, Sampson Weber Academy is just, right there, rock throw away. And then the great North, the big NO, Northwestern High School, right there on Grand River and the Boulevard. And, the Sound Conservancy made those contacts with those principals and, started some of those conversations, but it was all sort of moot until we could sort of dry out the building and do what we need to do. But I think you're right. I'd love to see some, if those schools were interested, if those parents, if those students were interested, some pilot programs in those schools about those issues that, absolutely.
That would be great. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, when the at the bicentennial 1976, one of the reasons why the National Historic Preservation Act came to fruition in the late 60s was because they were looking forward to the bicentennial, and they were thinking of ways in which they could preserve the landmarks and homes of the great founders of America. So maybe it's time for some new policies and legislation that foreground the underrepresented heritage of the U.S.
I know Allison's, I think, going to join us back here, but before I give over the mic completely, I just want to say, again, not trying to be too maudlin, but I just this is one of my first sort of appearances to maybe a Detroit audience. I know we've got some people out there, but I just want to say how much I miss Alex Alexander, the tour guide for United Sound Systems and musician, a dear friend who died about a year ago this last week. Karen Hudson Samuels, who, did, if it wasn't for her, I think the WGPR Museum TV, all of that, the marker there would be in a different kind of place. She was so inspiring to me. She always picked up her phone for me. Lee Simmons, who was our board member, who would be here tonight, I think, if he were alive. I know his sister is still, we're still in contact with his sister, but Lee was our in-house griot. He was the one who took the calls from Miles in the 80s and 90s, and so many more. The great Mike Huckabee from techno worlds, just so many people we've lost, including the 3 board members at Sound Conservancy. The fact that Sound Conservancy even exists still is a testament to advisors like yourself, Krista, showing us that there's still relevancy, that we still need to be showing up for work, and people like Allison who stepped up when we were leaking. We were leaking a little bit and continue to show up. So I just want to thank that crew. And I know also I want to say Jerry Pajor too, who was part of your team, who was part of the Grandy team, who passed away too not long enough ago. So Krista, last word to you, and then to Allison.
I'll just echo Carlton's gratitude and recognition. Please, everybody, if you're able to follow the work of the Detroit Sound Conservancy, please do so. And thank you all for tuning in. I'd be happy. You can contact me by email. I'm very easy to find if you just Google my name, because there's only one of me with my type of name. But also thank you all for supporting Allison and her local business and Source Booksellers. It's just an absolute privilege to have her promoting this work.
Just shout out here to the chat here. Tim Retzloff is also here. Tim, one of the great historians of Michigan LGBT life,
Yes.
who's also on the chat. Great people. Thank you so much.
And,
Thanks, Allison.
and also Wendy Schnaufer, who is a native Michigander and was the acquisitions editor for this project. So she had a huge hand in bringing this to fruition at University of Alabama Press.
So I just wanted to thank University of Alabama Press. They were very patient with me when I was requesting such an event. And also, I just want you to know that Karen Hudson Samuels continues to give the Detroit Sound Conservancy. Our archives are safe outside of the building at the station right now. So there's gratitude, all along. I want to share from my mother, Janet Jones, and I, that we intend to keep this book on our shelves. We intend to talk about it with pride and joy. And if you are looking to get the book today, it's available on Source Booksellers online. And it's also available in the store. And so I think I put the link in the chat earlier, but it's available there. And I just want everyone to know it is a university press book, but it is not a difficult read. And and we're just finishing celebrating University Press Week. And so this is also part of our Keep UP effort for 2021. So thank you both. I'm so glad, Carlton, you could be back with us for this special event. And the conversation was fantastic. Thank you so much.
I'll see you early next year, I hope, Allison.
I'm excited. Thank you, Krista.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Krista. Looking forward to reading the final bit,
You bet.
final version.